and welcome to this special edition of a Florida-friendly landscaping presentation called Tree-Mendous Storm Prep. It is July 6th. We have tropical storm / hurricane, whatever she's in the mood for, Elsa, coming our way this evening, tomorrow morning. So I know prep is a bit of a, we're coming in a little late to help you prep for Elsa, but we're going to throw in what to do if you do have some storm damage. But hopefully she'll just kind of skirt along and we won't suffer any particular major damage. And she'll just serve as a reminder of what we need to be prepared for. So I invited my smart friend, Dr. Bill Lester, to join me as we cover this presentation that was largely put together by people from the University of Florida to talk about different lessons learned during historic hurricanes here in Florida. So,
well, thank you, Lily. And even though it may be a little bit late to get prepared for this storm, there are more storms coming.
Yes,
and
there are.
Sometimes all it takes is one of those afternoon thunderstorms with a gust of wind blowing in just the right direction to make things blow down. So it's always a good idea to go out there and keep on top of your trees, keep them checked.
That's right. And University of Florida has a lot of information online about hurricanes and trees and recovery and before the fact and during and all of that. You can just Google hurricanes and trees, UF, and you will find a plethora of information. But we're going to cover some information that Mary Duria and Ileana Kampf put together. They're from the University of Florida with some research they had done on various hurricanes that historically have occurred and have most of them have impacted Florida, but some of them have impacted other southeastern states like Katrina. And they put that data together to find out the lessons learned from hurricanes. And we're going to concentrate in this particular series on trees, the lessons they learned about trees and hurricanes. These are the hurricanes that they studied and the data that they put together. So we have Rita, Georges, Katrina, Ivan, Opal, Aaron, Dennis, Charlie, Jeannie, and the big one, Andrew. So all of those and all of these different years, they compiled all the data, and let's see what they found out about trees and how they withstood these are all pretty big hurricanes here. I always love this, this statement here, just in case you weren't aware, the higher the wind speed of the hurricane, the more likely trees will fail. Now, don't leave us. Don't turn this off yet, because that's one of those, well, yeah, no kidding statements. But that's just one of the things they learned. And we're going to discuss what they did with that knowledge. So we do have mostly in Florida, as things become more urbanized, what we call an urban forest. There is such a thing as an urban forest. Dr. Lester, can you define what an urban forest is?
An urban forest is more the trees that grow amongst us, whether you're in a city or a more suburban setting, that we have direct impacts on, and which, as a general rule, we manage because we live with them. So it's not specifically the trees that are way out in, let's say, national forest, out in the center of it, that, you know, if they blow over, they blow over. It naturally happens. It's more the urban setting or suburban setting.
Right. And these are the trees that concern us. You know, it's nice that the trees out in the national forest are out there. We need them. But if they fall down, that's not going to impact our lives. These urban trees do, because we live with them. So things that affected them in storms were the tree species, age, health, and structure. Same thing with us. If, you know, any living thing, if how we react to stresses depends on these things as well. Our age, our health, our structure, you know, all of that. It also depends on the site characteristics, not just the tree itself, but where it was, such as the soil conditions, like soil depth or how much moisture is in the soil. Also, the conditions prior to the hurricane, such as precipitation and the time that it came through. We are pretty waterlogged right now before Elsa even comes through. That might play a part in what's going on below the surface with some of these trees. And of course, the overall condition of the urban forest around us, such as the canopy and the tree composition. Okay. So there were some of the recommendations, of course, that they want you to establish and manage a healthy urban forest, and the ways that we can improve wind resistance is, of course, selecting the right species of trees to have in our landscapes, in our communities. Designing the right place. What they mean about that, Florida Friendly Landscaping Principle #1 is right plant, right place. That pertains to trees. Pretty critically pertains to trees. Planting high quality trees. Choosing more wind resistant species, and we are going to cover that in this presentation. Having a comprehensive tree management plan, and having a structural pruning program for young and mature trees. That's the recommendation. So let's break this down. So lesson 2, we learned about lesson 1, the higher the wind, the more likely the trees will fall. Lesson 2, and I find this very, very interesting because this is something you might not have thought of. Trees in groups survive better than trees growing individually. Very interesting concept. One tree standing alone in your yard is in more danger of failure than that group of trees. Dr. Lester, can you explain why that may be?
Basically, they help to hold each other up and protect each other. I know with pine trees is very, very important, especially sand pines. So if you have an individual sand pine tree growing in your yard and it gets very large, they don't have very deep roots. It will blow over or die from, or get hit by lightning, or something else will happen to it. It's not going to survive extremely long. It's natural in the forest for sand pines to all grow together as a big group. They all die as a big group, and they all drop pine cones, and then another batch all comes up as a big group. So they help to break the wind and support each other to a certain extent.
They do, yes. And also, if you think about down below, the root structure, their roots are intertwining with each other, providing anchors, for each other as well. So the point of this program is for you, if you go through a storm and, some tree damage becomes very frustrating and stressful for you, we don't want you to give up on trees entirely, because they are important for not only for the environment, but they can be a pain during storms, but they can protect you during storms as well, providing that windbreak. So in these hurricanes, trees that were grouped together in Ivan, 80% had a survival rate, whereas 70% of single trees did. That's, it's a 10% difference. Same as with Jeannie, 88% of the trees in groups survived compared to 78% of the solitary trees growing by themselves, because they weren't originally by themselves. Nature doesn't work that way. So unless, of course, they were planted there by you. So their recommendation for this particular lesson that they learned, of course, is to plant trees in groups, at least 5, as opposed to individually. Kind of plant them, not necessarily even in a line, because that might help with windbreaks, but it is better that you put them in a grouping. An odd number is good for design aspect. Odd, always your eye sees it as one group. If there were 4 trees there, your eye would break that up into 2 and 2. It's just one of those weird things about design. So at least 5, 7, 3, you know, if you don't have much room. But trees are social creatures, I guess, and they grow healthier together. Recommendation number 2, and I talk about this in almost every single class. Diversity, diversity, diversity. Diversity is the key to a healthy ecosystem. Plant a variety of species. Have different ages of plants in your yard. Not necessarily the easiest thing to do if you have a brand new yard, but eventually over time. And different layers. What do they mean by that? Different sizes, different shapes. Add in shrubs. What else is this going to do other than provide storm protection, Dr. Lester? What do we always say these things do as well for a Florida-friendly yard?
It has a lot of benefits in the landscape. It does provide a diversity of food and nesting sites for different wildlife and animals.
You got it, yeah.
Provides food for a variety of different insects. You really don't want a monoculture in your yard, you know, a huge lawn and 1 pine tree. That's not very good.
Right. So this, it just seems to be a recurring theme with my classes. Diversity is the key to a healthy ecosystem. And it also, that healthy ecosystem known as your yard can be more storm resistant. And you spread that out to that urban forest into the community. Different sizes, shapes, species helps with that storm resistance. And of course, they also learned some tree species were more wind resistant than others. You keep mentioning the sand pines.
Yes, sand pines have a very, very shallow root system, and they grow relatively fast. So in the world of trees, it is a fast growing tree, and they can become very, very large pine trees. And yeah, a single large sand pine, I look at that and I think, wow, that's coming down the next hurricane. And from these numbers, obviously quite a few of them do.
Right, only 4% of them survived Hurricane Jeannie, that went through Hurricane Jeannie. That's a major amount that were taken out. Sand pines are natives. They're great in a forest situation. They're just not a great landscape plant. Whereas compared to bald cypress, which you would also need a lot of room to make this a landscape plant, but 95% of the bald cypress survived Hurricane Charlie. That was one of their findings. Now, they have a pretty extensive root system. And they have those, if they're in the water, they have the knots that they bring up, and that all just kind of anchors them there. So, you know, there's a big difference between these two species. So one of their recommendations is to plant tree species which have been found to tolerate wind better than others. So in their studies, some of the highest wind resistant trees, some of these are small trees, might be considered shrubs, are Dahoon hollies. They did well, they're a native. Crepe myrtles, not a native, but they did very well. I think because they're fairly smallish, a lot of them, so maybe a lower center of gravity, and smaller leaves to let the wind go through. Southern magnolias were on that list, which I was talking to a coworker about that, and that kind of surprised him because of the large leaves. But he also noticed anecdotally, he goes, well, but they let their leaves go. And I said, you've hit on it right there. Trees that become defoliated, they're sacrificing those leaves It gets rid of the wind resistance. I mean, yeah, it helps with better wind resistance. Lets them be more flexible, puts up less of a barrier with those large leaves. So in the end of the storm, if you have a defoliated tree, see it might come back, if it's not suffering any other damage. Podocarpus, live oaks, sand live oaks, bald cypress, pond cypress, and pindo palms had the highest wind resistance. Again, those are a smaller type, like a chunky.
Pindo palms have a very, very stout trunk also.
Yes,
they're not easy to blow over.
Right. So that low center of gravity and being, kind of chunky trees, I think helps them as well. And we're going to discuss palms. We're going to get to that. Here's our palms with the highest wind resistance. Chinese fan palms, Canary Island date palms, pygmy date palms. Those are the teeny tiny. Oh, no, those are coming later. There's Robellini. And of course, our state palm tree, the sable or the cabbage palm. What would you say, Dr. Bill, if somebody came up to your door today and said, hey, before that storm comes, I'm going to hurricane prune your palms?
I have had people knock on my door before, asking if I wanted my palms trimmed. I tell them no. I tell them I'll take care of it myself, because I do know of some services that prune palm trees correctly, but they are very, very few and far between. The vast majority of either legitimate companies or the fly-by-night, person in his pickup truck and a chainsaw do not trim palms well at all. They cause a lot of problems.
And hurricane pruning is not a thing.
Correct. It does not make a palm safer, healthier, or better in any way. As a matter of fact, hurricane pruning palms kills more palms than it saves from storms.
And if you think about it, especially these cabbage palms, how many hurricanes have they been through? I mean, we don't know. Way before we ever came around. Nature knows how to make these palms go through hurricanes. Now, if you have fronds that you are worried about becoming projectiles, what would you do?
If the frond or leaf is completely dead, you can go ahead and prune that off. But even if it's still half green, you want to leave it on, because the palm tree is still moving nutrients from that leaf to the newest leaf that's just coming out. And on a palm tree, the only growing point is at the very top tip of the tree. Mm-hmm. And in really high winds, especially on cabbage palms, the leaves will actually kind of wrap up and protect and cover that tip from stuff blowing around during a hurricane and keep the tip safer. So the tree may look pretty rough the day after a hurricane, but it will grow back because it protected itself. But the ones where you trim all the leaves off, that growing tip is out there exposed to shingles or whatever else is blowing down your street. And those palms normally die.
Very interesting, because we think of palms and hurricanes, we see that in our mind, the way that the fronds kind of blow upwards. Mm-hmm. And so they are constructed, for lack of a better word, to do that for protection of the heart of the palm. And I think that's really cool. So, okay, you want to recommendation number 2, consider removing trees that are on the lowest wind resistant list, especially if they are over mature and endangering lives or property. So some of these trees I'm going to talk about are on the invasive exotic tree list, and that stands to reason. Invasive exotics spread quickly, therefore they grow quickly. And anything that is fast growing is what, Dr. Lester?
Many of these trees tend to be very brittle. They grow very quickly. They make, many of these on this list right here make a big mess, especially the invasive ones. Camphor trees are very, very messy. Maples are at least a little bit messy. Sycamores are very, very messy, and they tend to be very brittle also, very, very easy to snap in a high wind.
Right. So some of these are natives. The red
Yep.
maple, the green ash, not very many of those, but they are here. Red mulberry, sycamore, and the black cherry are natives, but just because it's native doesn't mean it's storm hardy. You know, that this particular discussion is how well will it hold up in a storm? And there are lots of native trees that are just meant to have short lifespans in the forest. So if you are very concerned with what's in your yard during a storm, there are, you know, these trees that have medium to low. And camphor is an invasive exotic, you know, as it's about the only invasive exotic on this list.
Yeah.
But a lot of your cherry trees, your even your cherry laurel, sweet gum, I don't even have that on this list. That was probably would be one that is medium to low resistance because it breaks apart easily on a normal day. So things to think about. Oh, here's some more. Low, medium to low, slash pines, longleaf pines, loblolly pines, bottlebrush, interestingly enough, in the hurricanes that they studied, found to have medium to low wind resistance. Again, camphor is on there. Royal poinciana, not a lot of them here.
No, they definitely grow south of Hernando County.
But I put it on the list because there are people who try to grow them here. There's a lot of trees I left off this list if you go and look at their studies online, and only because they don't normally grow here anyway. So if you happen to be listening from South Florida, you might want to go because there are a lot more of your trees on these lists. The laurel oak, wax myrtle, and citrus. Here's a picture of citrus. Citrus didn't fare well in these studies, which could be part of the puzzle. It's a big puzzle. Not a puzzle as in a question, but one of the pieces that adds, you know, to why citrus is not doing well in our state commercially anymore. You know, one of the things, storms, freezes, and then diseases and insects just all added to it. The lowest wind resistance. Here's some of the trees that just did not do well at all as far as winds go. Pecan trees, tulip poplar. We have some of those by our in downtown Brooksville that we always get phone calls when it blooms because it's so beautiful. You know, sometimes beauty comes with a price. Laurel oaks, water oaks. Water oaks are just well known to hollow out and fall over, you know, and be a problem. Chinese elms, southern red cedar, that kind of surprised me. But, you know, they looked around and saw what trees fell, and these were on the list. Leland cypress, are pretty short-lived anyway. Oh, I have it twice here. Sand pines, we discussed that. Washingtonia palms. Australian pines, which are an invasive exotic, as well as Chinese tallow is an invasive exotic. Norfolk Island pine. They are the cute, cute, cute little trees you can buy in a pot at Christmas that they put ribbons and decorations all over, and they kind of, you know, weep a little. So adorable. You put those in the ground, they're going to get over 100 feet tall, be the weirdest looking Dr. Seuss tree you've ever seen, and be extremely weak. So I always, not to mention they're more South Florida type of tree. If they don't freeze, these things will happen. I don't recommend it for a landscape. If you can't resist the urge at Christmas to get one, keep it in a pot until it's too big for your pot and then throw it away and start again. I mean, I hate to say that, but that's what you have to do with those Norfolk Island pines. This one is going to be upsetting to people, but queen palms, they did not do well. I'll show you pictures in a little bit where your cabbage palms are standing around doing fine, all standing there looking at the queen who fell over. So, and avocados. Avocado trees didn't do that well either. So their recommendation number 3, and I kind of touched on this, when a tree fails or is removed, don't give up on trees. Plant a new tree in its place. Trees are very important. We need them. But when you plant that new tree, make a wise decision as to tree type and the site conditions that you have. Planting it correctly, which this doesn't even really cover that. Maybe we'll do another class on planting new trees.
Sure.
You want to touch on, Bill, about planting it correctly? What would be extremely important when you plant a new tree?
Sure. Every time you plant a new tree, you don't want to plant it any deeper than it was growing in the container. Because if you plant a tree too deeply and then, cover it over with soil and mulch, generally the tree will die, but it'll take about 3 years for that to happen. So it may look fine for a couple of years, then all of a sudden, seems like overnight it declines and dies. A lot of times when we go out and look at trees and try to diagnose what happened, it was planted too deeply. So you don't want to do that.
Yes. And do you know where Baghdad is? You are familiar with South Florida.
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, I think this is the Hurricane Andrew situation is where this picture was taken.
Oh, well, that must be somewhere near Miami Homestead area.
Yeah.
No, I've never noticed Baghdad, Florida down there.
Oh, okay. No, we'll have to try and find it. Be interesting to see how big that tree is now.
Yeah.
Recommendation number 4, become familiar with the recommended tree species, how they perform in natural and urban ecosystems in your community. See, some of the trees I mentioned that had medium to low were great native trees, provide a lot of wildlife, and would do well in a natural forested situation where it doesn't matter if they fall, as compared to in our urban forest, in our yard, in our neighborhood. You can, if you are watching this, email me and I will show my email at the end and request a PDF copy of this be sent to you so you don't have to keep rewinding it and writing those tree names down. Now, just because I listed it here as high wind resistant still doesn't mean it's the right plant for the right place. There are so many considerations: shade, light, and your soil conditions, space. This tree here, if we look real close at it, was planted too close to the house, wouldn't you say, Dr. Lester?
Yeah, I think so. It looks a little bit too close to the house and also to the sidewalk, which is going to cause problems.
Right. So there's a whole lot of considerations if you are considering planting trees, and you can always consult me or Dr. Lester or a master gardener to help you in those matters. Here's something they learned: palms survive hurricanes better than dicots. Those are just, broadleaf trees, and conifers. And cabbage palms are good survivors. That goes back to what was here when Ponce de Leon came. Probably a whole bunch of cabbage palms, probably sand pines too, but they were used to going through storms, falling down, regenerating, nature, burning up in the, natural fires, all of that. But what was made to be good survivors through all this? Cabbage palms. Not all palms, but these are pretty good. So that's why we really try to drive home your palm tree doesn't need help surviving a hurricane. If you are doing nothing to it, you will give it a better chance of surviving than if you try to help it by hurricane pruning it. Queen palms, though, as I mentioned, here's the picture I was talking about. Those aren't all cabbage palms. There's another taller one there too. But look, they're all looking at the queen. And where was the queen put? Right in front of the house.
Really close to the house.
Yes. So that's where she fell. Now here in Hernando County, and I warn people of this all the time, we're a bit north for queen palms. And you may say, my queen palm is 10 years old. It hasn't been a problem. What would you say to that, Dr. Lester?
It can have problems with the cold weather we get here in Hernando County every once in a while. Every 20, 30 years, we'll have a really, really cold winter. And if it gets cold enough, it can kill those queen palm trees. They're a little deceptive because they grow very quickly. So you can have a queen palm in your front yard and it's very large and it's only been there for 5, 10 years, something like that. It hasn't experienced a really dramatically cold winter, but every, about 30 years or so, we get a winter cold enough.
More often than that. But
yeah, but we'll get a winter cold enough to take out a number of queen palms because we are technically a little bit too far north.
Or we could have a cold winter that somewhat affected the queen palm, and then that summer have a storm, and you have a weaker queen palm, and down she goes.
Yeah, cold weather will actually damage queen palms and split their bark up and down. And now you have a damaged queen palm tree that still looks okay. Maybe you hadn't noticed it. And we have a hurricane that comes along 6 months later, and it makes it even more susceptible to blowing over.
Right. So their recommendations. I think we have all already gotten to this point. Mentally consider planting wind-resistant palm species. Monitor the palms carefully after the storms. Dr. Lester already touched on that. And allow at least 6 months for palms to put out new growth. Could you discuss that further?
Sure. Palm trees can grow very, very slowly. And after you transplant them, they lose pretty much their entire root system. So they spend time growing new roots first. So you have to be patient a lot of times for them to put out new leaves and start to fill out and look fuller. A lot of times with new home construction, they'll take palm trees that look basically like a telephone pole and plant them. And it takes a couple months for them to get rooted in and settled in and start to put out new leaves.
Right. So give the palm trees some time, even if they look terrible. But if that spear leaf at the top isn't coming up in about 6 months, then your palm tree didn't make it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pines may show no visible damage after hurricane, but may decline over time. They might die slowly over a period of 6 months to 2 years. When you have forgotten about the storm that went through and you think your pine tree suddenly died. Isn't that correct, Dr. Lester?
Something I ask people if they have a problem with a pine tree, an oak tree, or many other trees, not all, but a lot of trees are not tolerant of standing water. So because when we have a hurricane, we have a lot of rain also. So let's say in this picture, a year ago, they had a hurricane or tropical storm, and there was 4 feet of standing water there for a week or so. That will kill a pine tree or an oak tree, but it usually takes 1 to 3 years for it to happen. They do decline slowly. It destroys their roots and causes a lot of root rot problems, but it takes time for it to actually be visible and start to look visibly damaged.
And trees are very, very stoic. They won't
They go on a very, very slow time schedule.
They won't tell you they're sick until it's too late. By the time they look sick, there's not anything you can do about it.
And it's usually something that happened to it 1, 2, 3 years earlier that caused the problem.
Right. Yeah. So the recommendation is to, if you have pines, which we all have pines around us at somewhere, monitor them carefully, look for insects and the signs of stress or poor health. And those things are tall. And like me, I just bought, a lot next door to me. So a lot of those tall pines there, if they fall, they're going to reach my house. even before I bought it, if they fell, those pines were gonna reach my house. So you want to keep an eye on it and have an arborist come out and probably remove them if they start to look unhealthy. Lesson 4, trees that lose all or some of their leaves are not necessarily dead. I discussed that like the magnolia. It's one of its survival tactics, as well as other species. The winds are a-blowing and they'll say, okay, take my leaves. It would be like, you know, if I said, all right, take my hair. And apparently you already did that. No, you know, I'm going to survive without my hair. It'll grow back. Same thing with the tree and the leaves. Sometimes that's a survival tactic. They let the leaves go so that they weren't fighting the winds as much and the winds could go through their branches. We don't need to worry about gumbo limbos here. That's another South Florida.
No, that's down, that's Miami.
But live oaks, trees like that. So don't give up on them just because they're defoliated. You know, give them some time, like your palm trees, to see if they're going to come back. If they're not missing branches or have huge gashes, you know, out of them. So wait and watch for the leaves to come back and monitor the tree's health. But they say some species, such as pine trees, if all the needles are blown off, they may not recover. Keep an eye for that. Now, they found out in their lesson number 5, native tree species survived better than exotics, at least in the South Florida hurricanes. That stands to reason, doesn't it? There's a reason that they're native species because they do well here in Florida. And living in Florida includes living through storms. So we can see this light purple represents native trees and the darker purple represents exotic trees. We can see in every one of these hurricanes, native trees outperformed non-native trees as far as hurricane survival. Does that include all native trees, Dr. Lester?
No, not necessarily all native trees. It varies from species to species.
That's right. As we said, there are some weak natives.
Mm-hmm.
Sand pines, some of the cherry laurels, sweet gum, that are fantastic wildlife attractants, but not necessarily great for landscapes when we are considering hurricane safety. So they would like you to consider native species when selecting trees for planting. Pretty easy recommendation there. But again, just the word native doesn't necessarily mean it is strong in storms. You have to do your research and make sure it is native to your zone in your area and one of the stronger trees. Older trees were more likely to fail in hurricanes. And you know, that's kind of like us too. The larger an older tree is, the more branches it will lose. So you may have, we hear from people who only bought their home because of the tree there, which may be admirable, but not necessarily sensible. Correct, Dr. Lester?
Well, not unless they're going to have a certified arborist come out, look at it and check it for safety, plan on getting it trimmed some, you know, to maintain it every year or 2 or 3. Large, older trees do take a certain amount of maintenance, and it's going to cost money because they are large. You have to have somebody actually go up into the tree. That makes it more difficult. So it's an investment and it may be worth it, but you don't want to purchase a house with a huge old tree and just ignore it for years,
Right.
Because 1 year it's going to cause you huge problems.
And every living thing has a lifespan. Nothing lives forever. As much as
Exactly.
we want it to, we may say this oak tree should live longer than me. Well, how old was it when you bought it, for one thing? And the other is, yeah, it might live longer than you in a forest, undisturbed. Urban situations are hard on trees. Their roots don't get to grow, in just ground. We have streets, we have sidewalks, we have houses. There's urban pollution. There's a lot of stresses urban trees go through. So therefore, you have to understand it might not have the lifespan that you dream of. So also know the lifespan of the type of tree that you have, especially in an urban situation. Lifespan naturally in the woods, if no people were around, is different than lifespan in a neighborhood. So this laurel oak that fell on this house, they probably thought, oak, it'll live forever. It's an oak. No, a laurel oak, which I think we saw on there, had low wind resistance.
Yes.
And without any hurricanes, it's only going to live 50 years. So.
And that one was probably never inspected, never maintained, nothing ever done to it. It's probably ignored. And then it gets to a point where that's the one you end up seeing on the TV news after the afternoon thunderstorm that
Right.
fell onto somebody's house or mobile home or something like that.
And one of these could fall in the middle of a bright sunny day.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, go back to what Dr. Lester was talking about, could be 2-3 years after the storm, but if this was ever flooded and the ground was saturated and the roots didn't get enough oxygen, just, could have made it very, very weak. And like I said, trees are very stoic. They won't tell us, but just one day they'll say, okay, I've had enough. So arborists are always a good idea to come out and, see what kind of condition those beautiful big trees by our yard are in. Unhealthy trees are predisposed to hurricane damage. Unhealthy people are predisposed to more sickness. That just kind of goes to stand. This one I would say is probably a water oak, just because of the way it hollowed out inside, and they tend to do that from time to time.
Laurel oaks get a lot of rot inside of them also.
Okay.
A large laurel oak is almost guaranteed to have large branches with a lot of rot inside.
These people have lucked out the way this tree fell. Also avoid damage to tree trunks. That a medium-sized tree that has an incident with a lawnmower, you may think, it's not going to be a problem. Well, the scar that created grows larger as the tree grows larger. And it could be, something from long ago that is a weak point that allows rot, insects, disease, all that to come in. So you want to remove those hazardous trees before the wind does. Certified arborist, we can't recommend a certified arborist enough. I mean, it's extremely important. It's worth the money. It'll save you money in the long run. Also, we do have a forester here in Hernando County, don't we, Dr. Lester?
Right now, the position is open, but we will have a new forester here in Hernando County very soon.
And what can a forester do for you?
Foresters work more for people who are growing trees commercially. They manage large forested areas or managed pine trees, but they can come out and advise homeowners associations, things like that sometimes.
Yes.
I work very closely with our forester normally, going out and diagnosing problems and advising people.
They have been known to go out to your house for free and evaluate your tree. They're not going to take your tree down, but they're going to give you impartial advice on your tree for free. Well worth doing. So trees with poor structure or included bark are more vulnerable in the wind. Can you tell us what included bark and a co-dominant leader means when we're speaking of trees?
Very simply, as your tree, when a tree is small and it starts to grow, if it gets more than one leader growing, they compete. And now you have two main branches. And that makes a really bad point because one or the other is going to fall and split right down the middle. It's going to, one half the tree is going to go this direction, the other half is going to go this direction. Included bark is where you have the trunk and you have a branch that grows off of it. If it's growing at too close of an angle, you have a lot of it's not a very strong structure. So it makes it very, very easy for the branch to split off and fall because it's all bark in the middle there and not real wood holding it. Wood's a lot stronger than bark, and included bark is not very strong. These are things that really difficult for homeowners to look at a tree and tell, but these are the kind of things that foresters and certified arborists are trained on, and the main things that they look for right from the beginning.
Also, their recommendations are to plant high quality trees with central leaders, as Dr.
That's just
Lester.
one leader, not two, but one.
And by leader, we mean trunk, with central leaders and good form. We have other classes. I have classes called Trees, Marvelous Trees, which gets into the form of a tree. But this one right here, would be perfect in a nursery situation. It has one central leader. It's got really good form. It is probably, they grade trees in the nursery like eggs. There's a Florida Fancy is the highest quality of tree that you can buy, and it goes from there. But you want to find, we all love trees with character. There's a really cool sand pine, huge on the lot I just got next to me. A lot of character, but I'm kind of glad it's not right next to my house because a lot of character does not necessarily translate to good, strong tree that will hold up in your landscape. So this tree, I would say, is probably a clonal tree, wouldn't you, Dr. Lester?
Probably, yeah. That's a very, very nice looking tree, but like almost perfect shape.
Right. What
naturally, I would assume that it hasn't been heavily pruned or cared for where it is.
Right. What does a clonal tree, what does that mean?
Clonal means that it just came from another tree, like not from a seed, not from a lot of genetic diversity.
Right. So that they are, they find a tree that they like and they propagate it so that, you look at it next time you're in a store parking lot or something, look at the trees around the edge and you'll notice, hey, they all look like exactly the same. Well, that might be boring, but it is also safer. So, and those are the high quality.
They will take acorns from nice looking oak trees and plant tens of thousands of them to grow the nicest looking oak tree they possibly can. Then that's the one that they take cuttings from or propagate to make even more trees from that one perfect oak that had just the perfect genetic makeup.
Right. And that's what we want to look for our landscape. We can enjoy trees with character out in the woods. But when we're talking about something we have to pay to keep nice, we want to have something that's going to be strong, going to last, through time. And also have that preventative structural pruning program. Jim Mall from Pasco County always would say that, trees are like kids. You have to start training them young. And as we keep talking about a certified arborist, and we'll tell you how to find one, bring them out to your new landscape and say, how are we going to keep this tree on the right track? And they can set up, a yearly program and make sure that those trees are growing well and will continue to have good form and be strong. Because those well-pruned trees, here again, we have another bar graph. Trees that were standing after the hurricane, the ones that were unpruned are in blue, and the pink is the pruned. Even the live oaks, which held out well, a lot more that were pruned withstood the hurricane. That's the only one of these three that's going to grow around here. But you can see again, because it's undergoing that maintenance program, they last longer. So of course, they recommend you begin a preventative pruning program. And this is not it. This picture is not it. This is an example of the wrong plant in the wrong place, unfortunately. They plant, and you can tell it was planted because it's in a nice straight row with all the other trees, but that's right where they put the power lines. And the people who trim for power lines, they have one thing on their minds, the safety of those power lines, not what the trees look like, or even the health of the tree, getting them away from the power lines. So again, that is wrong plant, wrong place. And we see this all the time.
Very, very
So,
poor planning.
Yeah,
Yeah, you see it quite often.
Yep. So that was the wrong size for the space. They need space below. So while we're discussing that, is it true that a tree's roots mirror the canopy and the drip line of the tree?
Not exact. Well, the tree's roots will generally go out as far as the drip line and usually a bit beyond.
Yes.
And it all depends on the exact species of trees. Trees in Florida rarely put down the really large, deep tap roots like they might up north. Here, they don't really have to. They are free to grow sideways and look for water and nutrients. And that's what they normally do, whether it be palm trees or oak trees or maples or whatever else. The roots tend to be in the top, maybe foot or so of soil, and they spread far and wide, if given
Right.
a chance to do so.
But if you look at the canopy of this tree, where it wants to be growing, they didn't take it out of the street. They just took it away from the power lines. So you got to consider the roots are, going far beyond the other side of the street. So they're spreading pretty far, but they're pretty held back by the asphalt, by all the cement, by all these issues. So you want to give room for the roots, but look up as well. Don't just look down how you're planting it. As Dr. Bill said, you plant it so that no deeper than the tree was in the pot. Look up too, see what's happening up there. And trees with more rooting space survive winds better. We've been discussing that through this whole thing. Trees that were in parking lots or on street trees. We love street trees. I love street trees. But we also have seen them tear up sidewalks even when they don't fall down. They're not going to maintain a great amount of health. Or in small yards, had a 64% survival. If they're in a larger yard or in a park, they had a 73% survival. Or really large yard, a big park or on a campus where they had room to stretch out and grow, they had a 91% survival rate. So the recommendation is to give trees enough rooting space according to their mature size. What does that mean? It's a small tree, at least 10 feet by 10 feet. Medium tree, 20 by 20, and large trees, at least 30 by 30 feet. The trees need space. We have a community here that is about 30 years old now. And in an attempt to do the right thing, when those houses were planted, they wanted them to grow majestic trees, native majestic trees, on very small lots. Guess what's happening now, Dr. Lester?
Are the sidewalks popping up?
Oh yeah, yes. And people, even having trouble with the foundation of their houses.
Yeah.
So right plant, right place. Everything goes back to that. So good soil properties with adequate soil depth, deep water table, and no compaction help with wind resistance. Can you touch a little more on that?
Sure. You need to plant a tree in appropriate soil. If it's compacted, number one, that's going to make for a less healthy tree, and it's not going to be as wind resistant. Water table, that's more of a problem in South Florida. We don't have too many issues with it here. But if you plant trees where you have a very, very high water table, a lot of times the tree is kind of sitting in mud all the time. So that's not going to hold it firm or steady in high winds either. So soil does play into the whole thing. You need to have a healthy soil that the tree roots can dig into and hold itself up straight with.
So the soil depth needs to be ideally 3 feet deep with a deep water table, which we do have pretty much here, and no compaction. Compaction you may have on in your yard, especially if it's a new yard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an issue to overcome as well. Trees with damaged root systems are more vulnerable to the wind. There's nothing holding it down. You know, may look like a perfectly healthy tree, but things going on below, just not a strong system there, and poof, the tree comes down. And you can see these trees. These poor trees weren't given much of a chance. If you see here, that looks like pretty compacted, soiled a little bit of space that they had.
Yeah, that's an amazingly small root system for a tree that large. I'm surprised they looked as well as they did before they blew down.
Right. So be careful not to damage roots during construction. And be aware that when tree roots are cut, its anchoring system may be harmed and compromised. So we need a healthy urban forest around us with an informed public. That's what we're working on. Good cultural practices, that pruning, you know, having an arborist come and starting a routine of pruning, having a different diversity in your yard of species and age and size, looking for those wind resistant species. And also the soil down below is extremely important to the overall way in which a tree is going to react during a stressful time, such as a storm. So for planting, remember we talked about the benefits of planting groups of trees. Again, the diversity, but just because it's on this list doesn't mean it's right for your situation. You got to look at all of the aspects. Begin a pruning program. Again, look for those high quality trees. Look at the soil down below, figure out how you're going to improve that, or can it be improved, or is that a right place for a tree? It's got to have a lot of rooting space. And also look up what's going on up there that is going to affect the tree. And if you have a tree that fails, don't give up on trees entirely. Plant a new one in its place. If you have a very, very old tree, if it's going to be a hazard, you're unfortunately going to have to remove it. If you have trees that are on that lowest wind resistant list, they're close to your home or somebody else's home, you might want to consider having them removed. Now, how is it difficult or expensive to consult with an arborist, Dr. Lester?
Generally, no. They'll come out if you have them just come out to look over your tree or trees and evaluate them. They're probably going to charge you. If you have them do some work, they may roll that charge or, waive the charge if they're going to be doing some work for you. That depends on, the exact person and service. But it's a really good investment because people who don't do that, and like this picture here is a pretty good example. My guess is that's an old laurel oak or water oak that should have been cut down many years ago, right in front of this small wooden house. They ignored it and it blew over and potentially destroyed the house. So you weigh the cost between an arborist or a completely destroyed house. It's a bargain to deal with an arborist.
Yes, yes. And just remember, A healthy and wind-resistant urban forest will improve our air quality, increase our property values, benefits our own health, physical and mental, reduces flooding and erosion, conserves energy, lowers utility bills, provides shade and cooling, and actually mitigates hurricane force winds. Trees are good, in other words. So choose the right tree for the right place. Native trees perform better than non-native, but not all of them. We talked about planting it appropriately, do it in groups. Have someone come out, check it out. Now, how do we find this person who's going to come out and check it out? You can look up the International Society of Arboriculture, or I believe they have a website now that is just called treesaregood.com.
Yes, they do. I'm pretty sure they do.
treesaregood.com. Look that up. They have a really neat program there, or all you need to do is put in your zip code and say, I'm looking for someone within 25, 50, whatever miles of my house. They will show you all the certified arborists in your area. I think Hernando County itself has about 5 or 6, maybe.
We have about 5 or 6 on our list. Yeah, if you call here to our office, we do have a list of certified arborists that we took off their website.
Okay, yes. And what you don't want to do it was when the storm is looming, like right now.
Yeah,
If we get through
now
this
it's not a good time.
We get through this storm, call them to come out to prepare for the next one. Once they've cleaned up everything that's going to happen, because they're going to be pretty busy. Why would I call an arborist as compared to just a guy with a chainsaw, Dr. Lester?
It depends. If you have a tree or you just bought a house and there's a completely dead tree, it's obviously dead and it needs to be cut down. You could just call a tree removal service. Make sure that they're licensed and insured, because if they get hurt, you don't want to be responsible for their injuries. You want to make sure they have proper insurance and workman's comp insurance for their employees. But if all they're doing is cutting down a tree that you know needs to be cut down, that they can do. But if you have a problem with the tree, you're not sure how to maintain it. Is this tree, is it sick? Is it okay? Is it normal? Is it safe? You need to call an arborist for that, because they can examine the tree and tell you it's safe, or it's dead and needs to be removed, or it just needs to be pruned up to be made a little bit safer. So it all depends on what your situation is with who you call.
Right. And Dr. Lester mentioned the forester position is open at the moment, but you can always call Hernando County Forestry. Here's the number, 352-797-4130. Ask them, do you have a forester? Can I talk to them about the trees in my house? And like I said, they have been known to come out and evaluate. They're not going to take your trees down, but that might be good to know, because they don't stand to earn any money from telling you the trees need to come down. They're going to give you an honest answer. And as I mentioned, the University of Florida has a whole lot to look at when it comes to hurricanes and trees. Also, thank you, Dr. Lester, for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
We know we're pretty late for Elsa, but Florida's going to have storms, so we hope you can look this over and be prepared for the next time. Dr. Lester's email is wlester@ufl.edu. Please email him with any questions that you might have. You can also contact me, Lilly Browning, at LillyB@hernandocounty.us. Email either one of us with your questions, and we'll send it to each other, and
we'll figure it out.
Yes. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope everyone stays safe through this storm season here in Florida.
Thank you.
And everyone stay safe.